Hey everyone, it's Simi Shah, and welcome to Trailblazers. Through this series, we bring you trailblazing by South Asians and for South Asians. We're the torchbearers, sharing the stories of the leaders and innovators lighting the way across the South Asian diaspora. Today on the pod, we have Nandini Jammi. Nandini is a brand safety expert and digital advertising activist. She began her foray into this world after the 2016 election when she co-founded Sleeping Giants, a social media campaign turned movement. Through her work in marketing at a series of startups, she realized that companies often pay for ads without fully realizing where they're going to appear. Sleeping Giants thus became an effort to alert advertisers that their ad placements were often funding hate speech on news outlets. In 2017, their efforts resulted in a 90% drop in ad revenue for Breitbart News. Since then, she's led campaigns that have convinced advertisers to flee outlets like the O'Reilly Factor, and she's also spearheaded efforts to deplatform problematic white nationalist figures. In June of this year, she launched Check My Ads, an organization that helps companies consciously allocate their digital media spend to platforms that align with their brand values. You might actually remember her from the first issue of our newsletter, in which we highlighted a self-authored piece where Nandini reclaims her part and narrative as co-founder of Sleeping Giants. In the last several years, she's been at the vanguard of efforts to combat racism, sexism, and other systemic issues in advertising, tech, and media. As you can imagine, it is such an honor to have her on today, and I'm so excited for you all to hear from her. Nandini, as I just said, I'm so thrilled and excited for you to be here.
I'm really excited too. I listened to your podcast with Sopan, and it made me want to buy the book. So
that's what I like to hear. Tells me that we're hopefully doing something right. Well, welcome to Trailblazers. Nandini, we obviously have so much to talk about, but I want to go back to the beginning. I want to hear a little bit about the origin story in terms of how you got into this space. I believe you actually started your career at a series of startups, so would love to hear a little bit about that and the evolution to being where you are today.
Yeah, so I went to college and studied marketing and English literature, but I felt like after I graduated, I just didn't really know what to do, and I felt like I didn't want to, quote, waste my time like having a job and a salary, and I just felt like there was nothing that really excited me, and I didn't really know what options were available to me, so I thought I would just like go travel and bum around in Europe for a bit. I ended up actually finding a job in London. It just happened, I went to a happy hour and asked around to see if anyone was hiring a marketer, and lo and behold, someone said, yes, I know someone who's looking for someone like you, and hooked me up with an interview, and a couple days later I had a job offer. So it was as a content marketer for a tech startup in London. It was B2B marketing, and I was the only person. Well, there was one other person on the team, but there was no one above me to tell me what to do. So I quickly fell into this world of doing my own thing, and not having a lot of direction gave me a lot of room to learn. So I worked there, and then I got a new job a year later as head of growth for another tech startup also in Europe. And there I had to do even more. My purview wasn't just writing and developing content. It was also thinking about how to grow the company. So I learned how to do so many things, from the nitty-gritty SEO stuff to thinking about strategy and thinking about how to sell a product, how to create a new category, that kind of stuff. And then one of the things that my boss asked me to do at one point was to start a Google ad campaign. And I had never really been into paid advertising. I was always suspicious of it. I ran my first campaign just a few months before the election and learned my way around this complicated dashboard, and the rest is history.
Yeah. And so how did that eventually translate to you founding Sleeping Giants?
So I was running a Google ad campaign where I was very determined to know where my ads were going because like I didn't know much about advertising, but I didn't trust it anyway. Because I was like, how do we even know it works? Well, it turns out it's not working. So if you go and look in your site placements, which is a thing that I did, but nobody else really does, you will see that your ads are being placed in all sorts of domains that are not even visited by human beings. And at the time, it was like weird to look at it and see just not human domains, right? And I was not sure what to do with that information because no one had ever said to me, this is something you should watch out for. It turns out nobody was thinking about it. Whereas I was hoping to see my ads on like CNN and Slate and Washington Post and whatever, that's not where the ads were going. And I just kind of like, I never really understood what that was about. You know, we got a lot of hits on our landing pages, but my campaigns didn't get many conversions. And I found that, you know, deeply upsetting as a copywriter because I had written all the copy and I was like, am I not doing a good job of converting people? So a couple months later, after the elections, I go and visit Breitbart.com, and the first thing I notice is the ads. They're ads for all these massive companies and brands, and the first thing I think is these guys aren't checking their ad placements. So I have this like idea that if we all go in and block this site from our media buy, like there's a little place in Google where you can add domains to your exclusion list, then we can like stop the money from going to this website. Like that's how programmatic advertising works, right? The ads fund the website. That's how these things run. So yeah, I wrote a Medium post about it. I was like, I know it sounds crazy, but I think we can do it. Like if we all work together, we're all looking for a way to stick it to Steve Bannon and Breitbart and all these bad guys. And I also tweeted a screenshot. I figured, you know, like we can send the screenshot of this like hideous headline with your Old Navy ad, send it to the company, and they'll probably want to do something about it. The next day, I got a message from someone else who had the same idea, who had already started working on the same thing a week before. And he was like, awesome idea. We should join forces. And I said, of course. And it was amazing, right? Like just no one else in the world was thinking about it. Us two, we jumped into action and we had the same vision of what we wanted this campaign to be. And it was just, and when I say vision, let me qualify by saying we had no idea what we were doing, but we knew that we were both willing to sit here every day on social media and tweet at companies, as well as like we had the appetite to build a community, which is what it turned out to be. It turned out to be like hundreds of thousands of people who wanted to work with us, take screenshots, let the companies know where their ads are, and then help us keep growing.
And so you were managing all of this while still working in Europe as a copywriter, and you never met your partner in person yet, right?
We didn't meet at the time that we started. Like we met online, but we ended up meeting in person several times.
Okay. And you just mentioned Breitbart, which I believe was your first big win. What was that like when you realized, oh, this is actually meaningful work that's making waves?
It is so wild because I was not personally getting credit for it, right? Like my name is not on it, but it's so crazy to look at the news and be like, I run this thing and this thing did that. And the headlines went from, I mean, I remember the first headlines being about like the Kellogg cereal company. That was the first big brand that it was the first time we made international news, because at that time, Breitbart was really at the height of its power, and anything they did or anything that happened to them was news. And they responded to that by creating a dump Kellogg's boycott campaign. It was ridiculous and stupid, and it sort of fueled our fire in the beginning. Then I think it was like a handful of ad exchanges dropped them. More companies started to join in. And then it turned into, you know, people started comparing it to a movement. I think someone kind of compared us to Gamergate in the sense that we were extremely persistent, although I wouldn't like categorize this as the same thing as Gamergate.
It's super interesting that it started there. You alluded to this, but you actually ran this platform and movement anonymously for quite some time. People did not know that you were one of the faces behind the scenes. When was the moment of, hey, this is me, I'm one of the people that runs this? And after you decided to do that, what was the response?
So we ran this campaign for nearly a year and a half anonymously. And in July of 2018, the Daily Caller caught wind of my partner's identity and basically said, we're going to reveal it. My partner decided to take the story to the New York Times so that we could get ahead of the story. And, I didn't really think it through because on some level, I did not assign myself credit to the work that I had done. I did not give myself credit that I was responsible for a lot of this work. So I kind of felt like, oh, it's going to be his story. But he did invite me to speak to the reporter. And I assumed that it was as a co-founder or as a partner or, as an equal. I wasn't thinking in terms of titles because titles never mattered in an anonymous effort. So on some level, I wasn't giving myself credit. And on some level, I was like, well, no one else has been doing the work. So I'm obviously important and significant to this campaign. So when the reporter and I spoke, I told her, I answered her questions, told her what I do, what I've been doing. And then she asked me, cool, what's your title? And I say, let's go with co-founder. Then she's like, great. And then she comes back to me the next day and she's doing some fact checking. And she's also like, oh, by the way, your partner says that you are not a co-founder. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. Not a big deal. Let's just go with what he says. And just immediately deferred to someone else's framing of me, right? And then the next day, this article comes out and my picture is in the paper. Oh, I have to tell you about how the picture happened because it almost didn't happen.
Okay.
They asked me initially if I'd like to have my photo in the paper, and I said yes. And then they came back to me and said, we're not going to have time to take a picture. You're in Berlin. We're not sure we can get a photographer on such short notice. And at first I was like, oh, okay, that's disappointing, but I get it. Then I sat there and I thought about it and I was like, this is a year and a half of my work and this is our big coming out story and there isn't going to be another coming out story. I have to at least ask for it. I have to push for it. So my best friend sent me a template and she's a journalist. And she's like, send them this and they will hopefully get it. Side note, the reporter is also Indian and I think she's the same age as me. So when I sent her this email saying, representation is important, I think I should be visually represented in the story. I think that's important to the story. I'm pretty sure she got it immediately. Within hours, they had hooked me up with a photographer. So it was wild because that photo almost didn't happen. And so the next morning when I looked at this picture of myself in the paper, I was like, I made this happen. It would not have happened if I didn't do this, if I didn't ask for it. So it was an important lesson for me. And when we came out, it was obviously super exciting. We got a lot of support, but I just found it weird. I was not getting interview requests. I was not being seen as a leader in this effort. And in the weeks after that big story, my partner went on to take interviews with a whole bunch of sort of high profile podcasts and media outlets. And he didn't invite me to join him on them, didn't give me a chance to say no. I probably would have said no, to be honest. At that point, I was a little too scared to do interviews. But yeah, the point is I was never given the opportunity. I realized that I was giving up my power in a sense. I had, on one hand, I didn't really care for titles. Titles weren't important to me. But I did see that when he was framed as founder, it suggests that there's no other leaders in the movement. And I did not fully grasp the importance of it until a couple weeks after we came out, when I saw an Adweek interview with my partner who had been framed as co-founder and I had been framed as one of the individuals helping him run the accounts. And that's when I was like, okay, this can't go on because this is not accurate. This is not how this has worked. This is not the setup. At that point, I asked for us to have a conversation and hash out some of these details. For me, I viewed this as an opportunity to change the ad tech industry to help influence its direction in the future. But I can't do that if I'm not seen as a leader and if I'm not given a title. So we had to have this conversation that we never had before because, again, titles didn't matter in an anonymous movement. We had to talk about what my title would be. And he was like, well, you can be whatever you want to be, but you can't be founder and you can't be co-founder because I'm the founder. And I deferred to that once again because I was like, titles don't matter. It doesn't really matter. It's not about my ego. And so I came up with this name myself, founding organizer, which is a little bit like the assistant to the regional manager. And I went with it. And at the same time, I also gave up other things. He had always asked me to give him the press requests because he didn't want us muddling the message, which always seemed a little strange to me because I was running the Facebook account and he never really worried about what I was doing there. And I, in return, asked him to make me an email address and just give me access to the general inquiries email, which is where I believed that a lot of opportunities and media stuff was coming through. I respected his wishes. He did not respect mine. So that's how things started to sort of shape up after we came out. It was important. I realize now what a critical mistake I made by not demanding a title, because when you don't have a title and you are not a white man, even if you see yourself as a leader, people don't see you as a leader. So over the next year, I was basically forgotten. I was basically just erased out of the story in small ways that that I did not fully realize until much later. So it's little things like my partner going on a podcast and maybe mentioning me or maybe forgetting to mention me. And then it's kind of like, oh, I did this whole thing by myself, or taking a newspaper interview or going on CNN or whatever, and just not leaving any space for me to come in as a leader. So you know what it's like when you have someone who's a leader and then like huddled at the side trying to burrow my way into the room or into the story.
Yeah.
It just looked a little bit weird, and I didn't have any support. Like there was no one opening the door for me. I'm trying to like squeeze in and I can't get in.
Wow. And so I know that you made the decision to leave Sleeping Giants earlier this year, and it was under difficult circumstances and due in part to the fact that your partner had effectively erased you from this movement that you had built together. And for those of you who are listening, I highly encourage you to go read the piece I mentioned in the introduction. Nandini writes this story in which she reclaims her truth about the founding of this movement. What inspired you to write that piece and to put your story out there and reclaim this narrative about your co-founding this movement?
There was a series of things. First, I had no idea that my partner was at Cannes, where he had nominated us for a Cannes Gold Lion, which is like the Oscars of the ad industry. I didn't actually know what a big deal that award was either after we won it until like random people started messaging me, congratulating me. There was the fact that he didn't see anything wrong with that. And when I brought it up and confronted him, he not only didn't apologize, he turned it around on me and claimed I was looking for attention and glory and that I did not deserve to be in on the things that he had, quote, gotten for himself. And then it was, like I kept watching over the next few months. We didn't speak for over half a year after that confrontation over the Cannes Award. So I figured that he had no respect for me and that he didn't care what I did and didn't feel any sort of responsibility towards me. That much was clear. We did reconcile earlier in January of this year, of 2020, where he told me that he wanted us to start working together again and not have things be weird, and we should get back on the same page. And I accepted his apology. Even 7 months later, I did desperately want us to work together and continue our mission. I was willing to put my ego aside for it. What led me to this decision of coming out and reclaiming the narrative was when I learned that he was speaking to the ADL. I mean, I would later find out that he was working on what would become the Facebook ad boycott, the Stop Hate for Profit campaign, without telling me. And he was only in a position to participate in the boycott because of me, right? Like, this would not be possible without me. It is the biggest campaign, the biggest social media campaign of our work together, of, I guess, modern social media history. And I was not in the room to participate and shape it. And that told me that it was not just him leaving me out. This was not just a personal issue for me anymore. It was my expertise and my insights were being lost in this campaign. And without me and what I bring to the table, the campaign overall is weaker without me. So I realized that the enormity of keeping people out for the sake of ego or for control actually weakens our collective movement. And I am no longer serving the movement by allowing myself to get pushed around or by walking away from it. So I decided that I needed to reclaim my credit, my title, my narrative, so that I could continue working not just in the capacity as founding organizer, but as a leader. And so I came out as co-founder.
Wow. I think that's amazing. And as we all know, this isn't new to the world. There are many individuals, women, and especially women of color, who are often in situations where their talents and accomplishments are being undervalued, if not effectively erased. And so, what advice would you have for those individuals who are in situations not too dissimilar from yours, who are grappling with these same challenges and looking for ways to advocate for themselves and empower themselves?
Yeah, you're right, by the way, that this happens to women of color all the time. I was surprised. I mean, I've spent a lot of time in the past few years with female activists, and I know that this happens all the time. And it's just a toxic world out there, especially in activism, even in progressive activism, because it's all that you normally deal with, plus the sort of grandstanding of progressive people. So in a way, it's almost even more toxic. But I was surprised to see that this was an issue for people in the workplace, like just in normal jobs. For me, this was never a job, right? This was my extracurricular activity. So regardless, I think there's some things that we can all do to protect ourselves and to advocate for ourselves without, I guess, harming our future prospects. Because I know that's something that people are afraid of when it comes to coming out and telling your story. What I recommend that all people, especially women, do is write frequently, publicly, even if it's not good, even if it's not an essay. It doesn't have to be a blog post. It doesn't have to be any of that. It could be Twitter. It could just be you offering up your insights and your perspectives. I know no one asked and probably no one cares right now, but do it anyway to practice asserting yourself and to assert your opinions and perspectives. I recommend people use LinkedIn. I know LinkedIn is lame, but as someone who started writing on LinkedIn just because I was just like, I have nothing to lose. It was slow going. I spent months writing to myself, no one really engaged with my posts. But slowly I did start to find people who wanted to talk to me, who wanted to leave comments, who started to share my posts and build on my posts in their own posts. And it turned into something, when I write something on LinkedIn now, people pay attention. We started a newsletter together, branded, my new partner and I, and people pay attention to what we have to say. And it's really important to build this muscle of saying, I believe, I think, here are my thoughts, here's why, so that you can outline your approach, your expertise. And so people are thinking about you and want to come to you when they need help or expertise, or maybe to have you speak on their panel.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly sound advice and really speaks to the evolution of the movements we've seen in and around feminism, especially where women have been encouraged to take up space And I think previously that conversation was about the seat in the boardroom. Go take that seat. This physical space belongs to women as much as it belongs to men. And as we become a more technologically inclined society, it's been, okay, now let's talk about internet space. Put your voice out there, make yourself heard, take up internet space beyond just physical space. So I think that advice is incredibly timely and something that I'm personally trying to follow myself, actually. You just touched on this new consultancy that you launched, Check My Ads. And from my understanding, it's meant to be an organization that's a lot more proactive than reactive as compared to other movements that you've led in the past. I'd love to hear about it. What has it been like building it? What have you learned? And what's it all about?
Totally. So Check My Ads is the next step in brand safety. We formed Check My Ads as a brand safety consultancy to help companies figure out where their ads are going. And we also want them to be able to decide where their ads go before they're placed. So we want them to be able to have these difficult conversations around what their brand supports, what they stand for, what they want to align with, where they want their money to go, and where it's not acceptable for their money to go. We want to give brands the power to write those rules and ensure that their ads are placed responsibly before the public finds out, before a social media account or user or whatever comes out and calls them out. So really, we want to go from a place where a brand finds out through social media where their ads are to a place where the brands actually intentionally place their ads on places that they have vetted, that they understand, that they know they support, so that it's not a surprise to them when their ad is, ends up wherever it ends up. And it's a shift from thinking about advertising anywhere on the internet as being the best way to reach your customers, which also creates like a lot of waste and a lot of grief, as you know, to being more intentional about each dollar, being like, I want to be associated with this type of organization or this type of media outlet. And I want to, when I say support Black Lives Matter, I am supporting these Black creators and newsletter writers and people who are covering these important stories that are important to the Black community, as well as, to all the other issues and movements that matter to us.
And how do you respond to people who say it feels like platforms like these are just suppressing conservative viewpoints?
I would say that brands have every right to decide where their ads are being placed. At this time, those decisions are made by algorithms, and they're made by companies who don't check their inventory. And ultimately, it's the brand that pays the price for it. So I think it's just a form of brand expression. It's your right as a brand to decide what you want to associate with, how you want your brand to be perceived. And it's well within your rights to develop that. It's just part of your marketing strategy. To say that you're suppressing free speech is, I would say it's less about that and more about marketers developing their mundane marketing plans and deciding how they want to best reach their customers.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I imagine with your work, both in Sleeping Giants and now as you move forward, just being an activist in this space has prompted ire from certain organizations and certain behemoths in this space. I mean, has there ever been a time where you've been like a little bit afraid going up against these people or just been surprised by the reaction?
Yeah, I think that my partner Claire and I have been largely underestimated by the industry. We are both marketers who have no prior experience or knowledge of this industry, and everything we've learned in the past year. And we're newbies. We are fresh to the industry. We speak in a different way than the industry, tends to speak, and we bring a completely different perspective based on our concern for democracy and for human rights and for building an inclusive future. So we have faced, I guess, a lot of skepticism and cynicism from the ad tech industry. But at the same time, we're not speaking to the ad tech industry. We're speaking to marketers, and marketers they're absolutely following what we're doing. And they agree, and they love that we're able to speak to them in a way that makes sense to them, that isn't filled with jargon and double speak. I mean, we're clear with our audience that we're learning every day, and we're just sort of taking them on the journey with us.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, we're living in this time of severe misinformation and disinformation, which hasn't been helped by the advent of these tech giants like Facebook and Google, and also the fact that we're nearing an election. What sort of trends have you seen in the space as a product of these rising tech stars, and also the fact that we're approaching such a monumentous political event?
I'm sorry to say that we haven't seen any real material change since 2016. I still find ad exchanges serving ads on pretty well-known disinformation sites. I still find tech platforms working with white nationalist organizations, and it still takes weeks and months and really annoying series of follow-ups to get them taken down or get them taken seriously. Google and Facebook are both the biggest purveyors of disinformation and profiteers of disinformation. It's overall not looking good. That's why I believe that Check My Ads and why our mission is so important, because we are urging marketers to think about where their ads are going and understand the consumers today care about more than just the message of your ad. They care about where it has been placed. And so marketers are starting to think about not just their messaging, but also thinking about bigger picture things like, what does it mean when we advertise on Facebook or TikTok, or if we go with one of these ad exchanges that doesn't check its inventory? And my hope and my belief is that when they see where their ads are being placed, they will be shocked, first of all, because people don't understand how bad it is. And they will demand that their vendors do better, because at the end of the day, they are the customer, and the customer is always right.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting, because also what we've been seeing, obviously, in the last couple months is a lot of big companies leaving Facebook with respect to their advertising because of the propagation of misinformation and the fact that they're refusing to do anything about it. I mean, has that directly impacted your work in any way? Has it surprised you?
Yeah, we had just launched a couple weeks before the Facebook ad boycott started. A reminder that I had no idea it was happening. But it did turn out to benefit our company, because brands came to us wanting to know, WTF, like, what do I do about this boycott? Should we join it? What does it mean if we join it? When do we leave it? Like, how long are we stuck in this boycott? What we found is that they just didn't understand, like, what's going on the ground. Like, what do people want from us? What do consumers want us to do? And how do we respond to their concerns? So their issues were a lot more qualitative than I thought. I thought that they would be like, help us reach these, like these targets. These are the numbers we need to hit. None of that. They came to us saying, how do we like find the best way to connect with our customers? Because right now we feel like we could potentially lose their trust. And that is actually the right question to be asking. So I'm really happy to see that that's what they're focused on.
Yeah, I definitely think it's great to see, but also in some ways shocking, obviously, because the whole hoopla for the past number of years has been, we have to advertise on Google and Facebook. And so to see these companies engage in the boycott is pretty remarkable. Something I'm curious about is, I'm not a marketer, I don't work in marketing, but I often wonder myself, like, how do I practice good hygiene, so to speak, with respect to engaging with this topic and understanding like advertising and marketing platforms and finding ways to combat systemic racism and bigotry and other problematic factors in tech and media. I mean, what would you say to someone like me of how do I better engage with this issue?
That is such a good question. The way that I recommend everyone engage with the issue is by, well, if you have the time, go visit a bunch of disinfo sites and write to the brands with a screenshot of their own ads. That's one way to do it. But the other way to do it is to like ask your favorite brands what they're doing to keep their brand safe on the internet. Ask them more specifically how they're putting their money where their mouth is. How are they supporting the causes that they say matters to them? If they care about diversity and inclusion, for example, what steps are they taking to fund the creators, the journalists, the writers who engage in those issues? Because the only way for those folks to thrive, I mean, not the only way, but the only way that brands can really show that they care and they want to see these folks thrive is by putting their money behind them. So yeah, I would just engage on social media. Brands are quick to respond there, as I've learned over the years.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for people like me to understand how we can engage with these issues. So obviously you yourself just launched Check My Ads fairly recently, but you've been involved in this space for a presidential term. What have been your biggest wins? What have been the moments where you felt, wow, this is really important work. I'm so glad that I'm doing this?
Every so often, I have received messages from people on Sleeping Giants saying that this was the only source of light in a very dark time for them, and that the ability to send an email or a message to a CMO and then hear back from them and reach the desired outcome has been super cathartic for not only them, but for me as well. At a time when we feel so hopeless, the ability for anyone to just shoot out an email. And one thing that I did, I guess the sort of defining feature of Sleeping Giants Facebook was I would figure out people's email addresses and write templates for our audience to send out. Cut and paste, and you're good to go. Yeah, and like all of a sudden, some CMO receives like 200 emails in their inbox. That's a really powerful thing. And it's important for people to understand that their voice matters. And we're living in a time where it feels like nothing that we do makes a difference. But here's this place where they can do it, where they can invite their friends to join in. And then the next day, they see that their voice made a difference. So it's really important for us to remember that each voice matters, even if you're a nobody or like myself, you are anonymous. And that's what's important for us to remember. It doesn't matter what your name is, how big of a deal you are. At the end of the day, this is kind of inspiring and terrifying, but you are a customer to a brand and you can use that to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, no, that's a really poignant sentiment. Something that I'm also curious about is you alluded to this earlier about kind of being a woman in this space and not being taken seriously. I mean, what are the ways in which your identity as a woman or as a South Asian have kind of manifested in your work over the years?
I never really understood. I understood the power of studying. Apparently that gets you to where you want to go. But no one ever told me how to stand up for myself and assert myself. So I always felt this belief that if I did a really good job of whatever I was working on, that I would receive credit for it and I would receive the promotion or the money that I deserve, and that the work speaks for itself. I've only recently shed that belief. And I still have to work actively to assign myself what I deserve. No one else will give you the credit, no matter how close you are to them or however much you think they're rooting for you. It's cynical to say, but you got to assume that you're the only person who can watch out for yourself. I think a lot about my New York Times photo, where if I hadn't said anything, I would have never appeared there. And that was sort of the beginning of this transformation and this belief that we need to document what we're capable of and stand up for ourselves whenever we can.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. You know, I know it probably hasn't been the easiest ride up to this point, but I just want to thank you for sharing your story, because these are often the stories that go untold that women like me need to hear. And so really appreciate you sharing these insights and all these lessons learned.
Oh, thank you so much.
I'm so excited to see all that you're doing next and so amazed by all that you're already doing. And just want to say thank you so much for not only coming on the podcast, but again, like I said, doing all the work that you do with Check My Ads and everything else. Really looking forward to seeing what you're up to next.
Thank you.
This is a podcast from Trailblazers Media. For more content on South Asian trailblazing, follow us at South Asian Trailblazers on Instagram and Facebook.